So let me tell you now about some other discoveries that come from my research group by using this wonderful tool of computational cognitive modeling. And one of the big ideas is that it seems like children transform the input signal they encounter in order to learn, right? So what do I mean by that? For example, sometimes to succeed at acquisition, to seem to acquire the knowledge that they do, this only happens when the data that the kids take in for acquisition is a selective subset of the available input out there, right? So they're not paying attention to everything. They're only paying attention to a certain portion of the signal that's out there. And that seems to be true for a lot of different linguistic stuff. But sometimes acquisition success, to succeed, that occurs by taking a broader perspective on what counts as relevant data. So you're not just looking at one type of signal, you're looking at what might seem to be a less obviously related signal, but is in fact still relevant, still can be helpful for learning the thing you are trying to learn. Again, a number of different examples of linguistic knowledge, but sometimes you got to look a little wider. You got to expand your ideas about what is useful in that input. And then another kind of big idea is that children's knowledge during language development may be different than maybe what we thought. So for example, to learn some types of linguistic knowledge, children may need to have language-specific knowledge built into their minds of a certain type. However, the exact form of this knowledge may be different than what we previously thought, right? Like maybe we had certain ideas about what needed to be built in about language, and you know what, maybe what we're finding is you don't need to really build that in. Maybe you need to build in other stuff instead. And also, on sort of a related point, children's linguistic knowledge may sometimes be far more well developed than we realize, earlier than we realize, with strong similarities between child and adult representations, right? So it's just maybe because children are little and it's hard for them to sort of demonstrate the knowledge, maybe it doesn't come out so easily as it does with adults. But if you poke it just the right way, you can find it seems to still be there and look kind of adult-like. And that's, again, for certain types of knowledge about language. Another kind of big idea is that different doesn't automatically mean worse when it comes to language development. So, for example, if we think about input variation, the way the input changes from child to child to child, it turns out there certainly is input variation. By socioeconomic status, higher versus lower, right? There's definitely variation in children's input. But it turns out that for certain types of information, in this case syntactic islands, which we talked about earlier, the same language learning outcomes still occur despite this variation. The type of variation they experience is true, but doesn't really seem to matter for them being able to learn the thing they need to learn. And this has actually important policy implications. So if the input doesn't matter, like the differences are there but they don't matter, if you see differences in outcome, trying to target things that fix the input is probably not going to help, because it doesn't seem like there's anything really wrong with the input, right? At least, again, for this case study of syntactic islands, and maybe other things as well. And here's another kind of idea in this line is, even if the representations, it's in their minds, of very young children, maybe they don't match adult representations perfectly, right? They're not adult-like yet, they're still immature. Maybe they can still be good enough for helping other acquisition processes get started, right? And so early forms of speech segmentation or early syntactic categorization, you don't have adult-like knowledge maybe, but what you do have is enough to get the next steps of acquisition started. We've seen that happen. And then another idea is that learners with processing constraints, so children often have memory constraints or attention constraints, things that affect their ability to pay attention or to heed the input signal out there, or to reason maybe about the information that they have, or to remember the information that they've experienced. Processing constraints, right? Modeled learners may sometimes learn better than learners who have fewer limitations. And this is a very popular idea, a very popular proposal called less is more. So less sort of cognitive resources to put towards language learning turn out to be better in certain respects. And this was true, for example, for certain types of speech segmentation that we were looking at. So again, that's just sort of a smattering of different kind of discoveries we've made, again, by using this lovely tool of computational cognitive modeling. And again, the idea is that it's one way to use math to help investigate the magical process of child language acquisition. And so, again, what it does, it allows us to implement learning theories concretely, evaluate those theories, and better understand how the theories, and therefore potentially the children, right, that these theories are applying to, how they work. Why does it work this way? How does it work? How do children end up learning what they do as well as they do from the input they get and the time they have to do it? And so let's keep using this wonderful tool to investigate child language acquisition and see what more we can find in the future. And with that, I want to thank you for listening, and thank you, my collaborators, on some of the different work that you saw before. And thanks so much.